When you're painting an indoor scene versus an outdoor scene, there's some specific things that you need to pay attention to. And that's what I'm going to talk about today as I walk you through how I painted this scene. The first thing that you need to be mindful of when you're taking on an interior scene is the drawing. The drawing is very important in all of your subjects, but there's an extra complexity when it comes to painting an interior. Depending on the subject matter, you may be trying to show the magnificence or the architecture of the building, such as the case in this scene of this cathedral. I had to pay extra attention to this drawing, carefully thinking through the perspective. There are so many of these pillars and columns and windows in different angles. So this is a good time to break out your ruler if you're drawing a complex interior scene. You want to make sure that your lines are right, the perspective is accurate. So take some extra care when you are drawing for an interior scene. As always, I have laid out my drawing and then I wet down the back of my paper and the front of my paper. During this first phase, when I'm painting wet in a wet, I'm really thinking about the light of the scene. And that brings me to point number 2. Interior lighting can be very different than outdoor lighting, especially in this case where we have a large window and then we also have some man-made lighting that's going to show up right around here. There's a lamp here. So I could tell from my photo and from visiting the site that the window light is a lot cooler in temperature than the other interior light. That's one of the things that drew me to this scene, was that difference in color temperature. There was cooler light streaming through the window and there was warmer light of the interior, and I liked that the two of those were mixing. You want to pay extra attention to what is happening with the light, whether it's fluorescent lights, whether it's man-made light versus window light. Take a minute to study your scene or look at your reference photo. Think about what your approach to the light of the scene is going to be. This amazing cathedral had these really big stained glass windows, and I wanted to drop in some of those vague colors while the paper was wet. I wanted to keep it nondescript, let the viewer know that there were these large stained glass windows in the scene. It was a big part of what drew me to this subject matter. So I laid some of those colors in abstractly while the paper is wet, and you can see I've worked my way partially down. This is all still nice and wet, and the reason this is staying wet is because I wet down the front and the back of the paper and I'm not just painting on dry paper. So that gives me more time to think through my plan, and I could tell that some of that cooler light was reflecting off the top of all of these church pews and the ground over in this part of the scene. In this first wash, I'm being very mindful of the light effect in the scene and laying all that in this nice wet and wet wash. And there's a little bit of coolness here as well. I laid some of that in. And I realized that I wanted to include this little light here over in the top left. And so I added some raw sienna light and some raw sienna around that area just to start getting that in my head and building up that warmth and the light effect of this light as well. And you'll notice I also have a figure, and I'm looking at the figure, working in the light values of that figure right into this first wash. And I dropped in some skin tone for this figure and these two smaller figures back here. You know, I don't know what this is called, this ornate wood, all this incredible craftsmanship here, the amazing work that went into building this place and how it's lasted all these years. So there's this incredible structure over here made of wood, and I wanted to lay in some of those rich colors, the rich warm color over here while my paper is still nice and damp. That's what's nice too about this approach, is it really does give you time to think through those things. I wasn't necessarily knowing how I was going to take on every little bit of this, but as I get into it and I have time while the paper is still damp, I can continue to think and process and work into the paper while it's still damp. And that is a look at the first wash of the painting. After this, I let my paper dry, and then we're going to move into the middle values of the painting. Something that happens from time to time when I am painting and recording my painting is that I forget to hit record. And that's what happened here. So I was getting through this wash here and I forgot to hit the button. So I'll walk you through what I've done so far. So I started over here on the left. And because I laid in some of the value for this wood structure over here, I wanted to paint around some of that to show the light that was hitting it. So you can see I painted right around the top of that. And then as I got to this light source, I also avoided that. So I painted around that area, and then I added some raw sienna light around the edge of that to start to build up that glow and that strength for this light that was shining over here. And I'm working my way from left to right. And I'm also mixing cooler colors and warmer colors. So this is a lot of raw sienna. Where you see warmth, I'm using a lot more raw sienna. Where you see cooler colors, I'm adding in some cobalt blue and some lavender and some neutral tint just to strengthen up the wash as well. So let's go ahead and keep moving forward. Now that I've hit record, we can see this part as well. And so as I'm moving around the stained glass, I knew that I want it to be a lot cooler back here. That does a few things. It shows the difference in color temperature, in light, but it also lets that sit more in the background. That was the challenge within this scene, is getting enough contrast to make the light feel bright, but not overworking it so much that I don't get any depth in the scene. And already we can kind of start to see the beginning of the light really showing. We've laid in our light values, and now we're going around it with our middle values, and that does make a lot of difference as well. I'm lifting up some of the edges around this light source because I like that hazy, that light effect where some of the edges are just kind of blurred a little bit. And so I'm getting that effect by getting a clean, damp brush and lifting off some of what I just painted. So let's continue working through this middle value, taking my time to paint around the window. And again, down here lower, the light was a little warmer, so I'm adding more raw sienna, warming things up. And I have some time here to paint around anything that I want to leave behind from my first wash. So far, it's just these figures, adding color for their clothing. One of the challenging parts of this scene was how to address the complexity of the light shining on the top of these pews. And for now, I'm just bringing over a few little dashes and lines. I come back to this later. So that ties me over to here and into this figure. And now I'm coming up here and getting some more middle value on this part of the scene. But that was a really fun part of the painting. I could really just use brushwork and just kind of abstractly lay that in. In no way am I trying to render that exactly what it was. I'm really trying to create an impression of that. So I'm working my way through that. After that, I'm tying in some of the arches here, and that comes down into the figure. At first, I didn't love how that was landing right where the figure's head was, even though I kind of designed it that way. After I got into my painting, I wasn't sure about that, but I think it all does come together and it works fine in the end. And in some ways, it brings some attention right here, which is pretty nice. And now I can move on down to here. I want to focus the light into the painting, right? So that's when I decided I'm going to go ahead and go over all of this with middle value, maybe leave a few suggestive loose marks behind, but all of that needed to be stronger in value. And I knew that the light here was cooler. I wanted that to be a reflection of the cool light coming through the window. So I added warmer color back here and cooler color as we got up into this area of the scene. So here's a look at the middle values of the scene. After that has dried, now I'm ready to come in and really start bringing this whole scene together. And I'm starting at the top right. I know I wanted a little more emphasis around that window to suggest the magnificence of the architecture. And these large pillars do such a nice job of leading us around the scene. So you can see as I'm getting in these details, I'm thinking about the light. One thing I did here, because these pillars are curved, I laid in my mark and then I would soften the edge. That's how I was able to create that effect. So I lay in my mark and then I soften the right side of it to show the curvature of that pillar. There's a lot of little details in this scene, and it takes me some time to render them out and to continually keep stepping back and making sure that things are looking how I want them to look. Okay, one trick you can do is you can turn your painting sideways to help you with some of these really straight lines. That left-right movement is a little more natural than trying to go up and down where you end up using your wrist a lot more. It's harder to get a really straight line that way. So if you find yourself struggling with some of those verticals, turn your paper sideways and see if that feels a little better for you. All right, now I'm getting into some detail on the figures, and that really starts to bring some attention forward. It's adding some importance to this area of the painting, and all that is valuable because once you get in those details, the background starts to feel more like a background. Even though it's important and it's a big part of this painting, I do want to make sure we have enough attention here in the middle ground of the scene as well. And I'm trying to get those lines as best I can, but while still keeping things loose. And here's that bit of challenge I had trying to convey the mass amounts of pews here without having to paint every single pew. So I put a lot more lines here closer, and then as it gets further back, I just did some dry brush marks to suggest the crazy amount of pews that are here. But I didn't have any interest in trying to paint every single pew exactly as it was. And so again, just like I did here, trying to create an impression, keeping it as loose as I can. All right, and now I'm adding some darks into this area. It needed a little more attention, and I was trying to do that amazing craftsmanship justice. And by getting a complete range of values, lights, middle, dark, we're starting to get a feel of believability and of detail. All right, some more detail back here. I had a couple people in the background as well. And just little architectural suggestions here. There's just beautiful arches and things just all over the place. And that's one of the big challenges with a subject like this, is knowing that I can't just paint everything exactly as it is. And if I do, then the painting's going to be very overworked and cluttered, and you're not going to know what's important in the scene. So finding ways to suggest as much as you can is helpful. And that's a very vague statement, I understand, but that does come with time. The more you practice doing this, the more you can squint and look and try to understand the values that make up things, the better you're going to get at creating a loose feeling and an impression of something rather than rendering every little detail. So we're getting close on this one, and that brings me to my last point when painting interiors, and this goes for interiors or anything else that you're painting. Learn how to focus your painting. So this is all looking pretty good, but I want to ensure that when a person glances at this, that their eye goes right here and also around the scene, but this area needs a little more emphasis. And if you can learn to add some emphasis and focus to your paintings, your work is going to take a big leap forward, because it's comforting to know what the main point is, to know what the punchline is of the painting. And by adding a little more contrast in the key areas of your painting, you can bring that level of emphasis that clarifies your painting. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I added a little more detail on the background figures. I added a little bit of texture on the wall here. But one of the last things that I do is I realized that the figure needed just a little more darks. These pews here needed just a little more emphasis. And by adding that bit of contrast and using a little bit of gouache, by adding some finality and some polish to this area of the painting, I can show the viewers that that is an important part of the scene. And so right here, you can see I go in and I add a little more dark on some of the pews and just in that general area. And I feel like that helped to bring that area into focus a little bit more. And there you have it. That is a look at the final painting. Painting interiors is really fun and exciting and different, and the subject matter is just endless. So I hope that these tips are helpful for you and that you can use them in your next interior painting. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? You ever had that experience? Well, I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, and you can take a look at these crucial planning steps before you start each painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.